Hello, dear friend. We're delighted to have you on the Historical Facts channel. Close your eyes for a moment. Go on, just for a second. Think back. Think back to a Friday evening. Could be 1979. Could be 1984. Could be 1991. Doesn't matter exactly when. Pick your year. The week is over. School or work is done. And there is a specific feeling in the air, a feeling that, if you were alive during the VHS era, you know in your bones. You are standing in a video rental store. The carpet is patterned. The lighting is slightly too yellow. The shelves are lined with rectangular black plastic cases, hundreds of them, each one a doorway to another world. You pick one up, feel the weight of it, read the back, study the cover art. Sometimes beautiful, sometimes ridiculous, always tantalizing. There's a smell to the place, plastic and carpet cleaner and something indescribably cinematic. And then you find it, the one. You carry it to the register. You drive home. You slide it in. You press play. And the world, your world, the real one outside that window, disappears. That moment, that specific, irreplaceable, now vanished moment. That is what this video is about. Today we're going to take a long, loving look at one of the most transformative inventions of the 20th century. An invention that most people don't give nearly enough credit. The VHS videocassette. Where it came from, who fought over it, who loved it, who hated it, who made fortunes from it, and who lost everything trying to stop it. This is the story of the tape, and it is a story about freedom, about who gets to decide when and where and how you consume culture, about the power of convenience, the magic of ownership, and the very human desire to press pause on a moment and hold it still. Chapter 1: A World Without Replay. To understand how revolutionary the VHS tape was, you first have to understand what life was like before it existed. Imagine a world where television was not a library, not an archive, not something you could pause, rewind, or revisit. A world where television was, in the most literal sense of the word, live, ephemeral, here and then gone, like smoke. Television, in its early decades, operated by one rule: you watch when we tell you to watch. The network set the schedule. If you missed it, if you were working late, or visiting your mother-in-law, or simply forgot, that was simply and completely too bad. The show went on without you, and unless they reran it, you had missed it, permanently, forever. The word appointment television is still used today as a quaint artifact of language. In the pre-VHS era, it wasn't just an expression. It was a literal description of how human beings managed their time. For filmmakers and archivists, the ephemerality of early television was catastrophic. The BBC wiped hundreds of episodes of early Doctor Who to reuse the videotape. Episodes of beloved shows, historic broadcasts, erased permanently. The idea of permanent preservation seemed both impractical and unnecessary. But even as consumers accepted this reality, even as they built their lives around it, there was a hunger, a deep, unarticulated yearning for control, for ownership, for the ability to say, "I want to watch this again, and I am going to." The answer would come from Japan, and it would come wrapped in controversy, legal battles, and one of the most fascinating corporate battles the modern world has ever seen. The race to give consumers control of their viewing began in 1956 with the Ampex Viv RX 1000, a refrigerator-sized machine costing the equivalent of $500,000 today. Magnificent, but absolutely not purchased by anyone who lived in a house with a kitchen and a lawn. Throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, The holy grail was helical scanning, a way to wrap tape around a spinning drum, laying tracks diagonally, packing vastly more information onto a given length. The technology that would eventually make consumer video recording possible. By 1971, Sony had a working cassette prototype. The finish line was in sight. The race was truly on. Chapter 2: The Engineers and Their Dreams. There is a particular kind of person who changes the world, not the loudest in the room. Often, the people who actually change the world are engineers, quiet, obsessive, methodical people who become fixated on a problem and simply refuse to let it go. In the story of home video, there are two such institutions, Sony Corporation and JVC, the Victor Company of Japan. Sony got there first. The engineer most responsible was Nobutoshi Kihara, a man who thought about technical problems while eating, while bathing, while lying awake at 3 a.m. By 1975, Betamax was in living rooms. JVC followed in 1976 with a competing format, VHS, Video Home System. The key decisions JVC made and how they differed from Sony's form one of the most fascinating case studies in the history of technology: recording time. Sony's original Betamax recorded approximately 1 hour. 1 hour was a genuine technical achievement, but JVC had done something Sony apparently had not. They had asked consumers what they actually wanted to do with a home video recorder. And what consumers said, overwhelmingly, was record movies and football games, which are longer than 1 hour. So JVC made the engineering trade-off: slightly larger cassette, slightly slower tape speed, marginally lower image quality. And I mean marginally. In most practical viewing conditions, the average consumer couldn't really distinguish between them. But 2 hours of recording time at launch. 2 hours versus 1 hour. It sounds trivial. It was enormous. Licensing. Sony was reluctant to license Betamax widely. It was their achievement, their product. JVC took the opposite approach, aggressively seeking deals with Sharp, Hitachi, Mitsubishi, and crucially RCA in the United States. More machines meant more retail presence. More retail presence meant more consumers. More consumers meant lower tape prices. The virtuous cycle of a dominant format was beginning to spin. Now, let's talk about what Betamax was actually like, because the people who loved it have a point worth hearing. Betamax produced a sharper, more stable image than VHS. The cassettes were more elegantly designed. If you put both pictures side by side on a good monitor and looked carefully, you could see the difference. And Betamax had Akio Morita, Sony's charismatic co-founder, one of the great businessmen of the 20th century, personally championing it. He traveled the world demonstrating it to heads of state and media moguls. He was convinced, deeply and completely, that the better product would win. He was wrong. By the early 1980s, VHS held roughly 60% of the American market. By the mid-1980s, closer to 70%. The format war was over, even if no one had officially declared a winner. VHS had won, not because it was technically superior, because it was there, it was affordable, it recorded long enough, and because JVC had understood something fundamental about how consumer markets actually work. The format war is over. Long live the tape. But while Sony and JVC were fighting their battle, something else was happening. Hollywood was watching, and Hollywood was terrified. Chapter 3: Hollywood versus the Machine Picture, This Scene. It is 1976. You are Jack Valenti, president of the Motion Picture Association of America. You have just been briefed on this new thing, the home video cassette recorder, A machine that lets people record movies, the very content your member studios have spent hundreds of millions of dollars creating. And your first thought is, this is going to destroy us. Valenti was not a stupid man. In a famous appearance before Congress in 1982, he said something that has echoed through the history of technology ever since. I say to you that the VCR is to the American film producer and the American public as the Boston Strangler is to the woman home alone. The Boston Strangler, that was the comparison. He was, of course, catastrophically wrong. But in 1976, it genuinely wasn't obvious, and the legal battles that followed were real, consequential, and tell us a great deal about how technological change actually unfolds. The fear had a name: copyright. If you record a movie off television at home, you are making a copy of a copyrighted work without the copyright holder's permission. The studio said, clearly illegal. Sony said, not so fast. Universal Studios and Disney filed suit against Sony Corporation. The case, Sony Corporation of America versus Universal City Studios, wound through the court system for years, ultimately reaching the Supreme Court. Sony's argument introduced a concept that would reshape technology law forever: fair use. The idea that certain uses of copyrighted material, uses that don't meaningfully harm the market for the original work, are permitted without permission. Recording a TV show to watch later? That's fair use. You were going to watch that show anyway. You're not stealing a theater ticket. In January 1984, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of Sony. The majority opinion introduced the substantial, non-infringing use standard. If a device is capable of substantial, non-infringing uses, the manufacturer cannot be held liable for its infringing uses. 5-4. One vote the other way, and the history of home video, and, by extension, the history of the Internet, of YouTube, of Netflix, of every technology that came after, would have been radically different. Jack Valenti did not take the loss graciously. He continued to warn about the dangers of home video for years, but the market was already rendering its own verdict. Because even as the legal battles raged, something remarkable was happening. The home video rental industry was being born. In garages, in converted gas stations, in the back rooms of delicatessens, one cassette at a time, in hundreds of small towns and big cities. It was being born in a little store in Los Angeles, where a man named George Atkinson had a very good idea. Chapter 4: The Invention of the Video Rental Store. The year is 1977. George Atkinson has noticed something interesting about the pre-recorded video cassettes appearing on the market. Studios are selling them at $50 to $80 apiece, $200 to $300 in today's money. For a single movie, nobody is buying them. The prices are insane. But Atkinson has a different idea. If people won't pay $80 to own a movie, maybe they'll pay a few dollars to borrow it for a night. He opens what is generally credited as the first video rental store in America, Video Station, in Los Angeles, in December 1977. About 100 titles available in both VHS and beta. People come. Of course they come. They have been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this. By 1985, there are approximately 15,000 video rental establishments operating across America. Let me try to describe what it was actually like walking into a good video store in the early 1980s. Because this is the heart of the nostalgic experience that so many people carry with them. The stores were intensely local. Each one had its own character, its own layout, its own handwritten recommendation cards taped to the shelves, its own particular mix of new releases and deep catalog. You walked through the door and hit a specific smell, plastic and carpet, and the faint chemical tang of magnetic tape, the smell of possibility, new releases near the front. Behind them, action, comedy, drama, horror, science fiction, children's, foreign, and, if you were lucky, a classic section or art house corner tucked away. The cover art was everything. VHS cover art in the 1980s was its own art form, bold, dramatic, often wildly inaccurate to the actual content of the film, designed to grab your attention from across the room in the 2 seconds before your eyes moved to the next title. And then, if you were a regular, you might ask the person behind the counter. Because the video store clerk, this figure who has become somewhat mythologized in cultural memory, and not without reason, was often genuinely knowledgeable. Many of them loved movies with a ferocity that hadn't yet found another outlet. The video store clerk was often the most knowledgeable film resource available to an ordinary person in an ordinary town. They had seen everything. They had opinions. They would tell you, sometimes without being asked, that you should not rent that film, but this one over here in the foreign section. You've probably never heard of it, but trust me, is one of the greatest things ever made. There is one clerk whose story has become legendary. A young man working at video archives in Manhattan Beach, California in the early 1980s. Endlessly enthusiastic, encyclopedically knowledgeable. He rented movies voraciously, studied them obsessively, and nurtured a dream of one day making his own. His name was Quentin Tarantino. The video store democratized cinema access in a way that is still underappreciated. Before it, if you wanted to see a foreign film, a Bergman, a Kurosawa, you needed to live near an art house cinema or be wealthy enough to acquire 16mm prints. After the video store, you could find Rashomon at your local strip mall. The video store changed who got to be a film lover. And in doing so, it changed who got to become a filmmaker.
Chapter 5. The Culture of the Cassette. There is a before and an after. The way people related to moving images, to film, to the experience of watching. All of it has a before VH and an after VH. And the difference is not a matter of degree, but of kind. Before VH. If you wanted to see a film that had finished its theatrical run, you could wait years for it to appear on television. Or you hadn't seen it, and that was the end of it. After VH, you went to the video store on Saturday afternoon and brought it home. Home video changed the relationship between audiences and films. Before VHS, a film was an event. You experienced it once in a darkened theater, and then it was gone. After VH, a film could be a companion. You could watch it 10 times, pause it in the middle, rewind to your favorite scene, study it, really study it, in a way simply impossible in a theater. This created a new kind of film love, obsessive, detailed, forensic, the kind of viewer who can quote not just lines, but timing. This kind of viewer had always existed, but VHS gave them new tools, new fuel. Friday night was the center of gravity. The Friday night trip to pick a movie was a genuine family ritual. The negotiations, the compromises. Dad wants the war movie. Mom wants the drama. The kids want the cartoon. They get the cartoon. Dad watches it happily. The preparation rituals were their own pleasure. Getting the popcorn ready, dimming the lights, the children in their pajamas. And then, the moment. The tape going in, that satisfying click and whir, the television shifting to the soft blue of the VCR input. And then, the previews. If you have any lived memory of the VH era, this will be immediately vivid. Certain trailers appeared on so many different tapes that entire households could recite them from memory. And before the previews, the FBI warning. That blue screen with white text, the formal announcement that unauthorized copying is prohibited by federal law. It is difficult to articulate exactly why the FBI warning became such beloved cultural iconography, but it did. It was the gate you passed through before the movie began. There was also, and this lives vividly in the memories of people who rented films in the 1980s, be kind, rewind. Rental stores, facing the problem that returned tapes were frequently not rewound, began adding stickers to their cases. Some charged a fee if a tape came back unrewound. The etiquette of tape rewinding became a genuine social norm, a small obligation of community membership. You rewound the tape, you put it back in its case, you returned it on time. These were the rules, informal but real, of the video rental community. The VH image was not crystal clear high definition. It was softer, slightly blurrier, with warm colors. Approximately 240 lines of resolution compared to the 1080 of modern formats. Imperfect. And yet there are people, many people, not just eccentrics, who will tell you they prefer the look of VH, who find the digital sharpness of modern formats slightly cold, slightly clinical. This is partly nostalgia, but it's also partly something real about the aesthetic. The imperfection is part of the texture. Horror films have a special relationship with VH aesthetics. The grain, the occasional tracking error, the dropout. This creates an atmosphere of unease perfectly suited to horror. The VH horror film has become its own recognized subgenre. Films like V/H/S deliberately evoke VH aesthetics as a storytelling choice. The tape trading community of the 1980s was a remarkable piece of informal cultural infrastructure. Films that studios had suppressed circulated underground. Foreign films that never received official American releases were available, in quality ranging from excellent to barely watchable, to those who knew where to look. This community is the spiritual ancestor of internet file sharing, passionate enthusiasts using available technology to share cultural artifacts that commercial systems were failing to distribute. And then there was time shifting. The ability to record a television program to watch later, the specific use the Supreme Court had found daily life, transformed daily life in subtle but profound ways. You could now be in two places at once, in the television sense. You could go to your daughter's school play on Thursday night and still watch the season finale. You could travel for work and not miss the playoffs. The fundamental expectation that you should be able to watch what you want when you want it, an expectation so deeply embedded in modern consciousness that it seems almost like a natural law, was established by the VCR. Before the VCR, that expectation simply did not exist. After the VCR, it could not be unimagined. The culture of the cassette was, in the deepest sense, a culture of control, and once people had it, they were never going to give it back.
Chapter 6. The Golden Age. If the late 1970s was the birth of home video, the 1980s was its golden age. By 1984, the home video market in the United States alone was worth more than $4 billion annually. By 1988, approaching $8 billion. Numbers that transformed Hollywood's financial calculations, that created entirely new industries, that changed the cultural landscape in ways only beginning to become visible. The video rental store had, by the mid-1980s, become as ubiquitous in American life as the gas station or the fast food restaurant. For the first time in the history of moving images, where you lived was no longer a significant determinant of what you got to see. Blockbuster Video opened its first store in Dallas, Texas in 1985, and from the very beginning, it was something different. Its founder, David Cook, was a software entrepreneur who applied database management principles to video retail. He tracked inventory with computer systems. He analyzed rental patterns. He stocked new releases in quantities calibrated to actual demand rather than the owner's intuition. Blockbuster was retail science applied to video rental, and it worked. From one store in 1985 to nearly 900 by 1989. The blue and yellow sign became one of the most recognizable pieces of retail iconography in America. But here's what tends to get lost in the nostalgic glow. Blockbuster was not universally loved. The independent stores that had built the market, the stores with personality and knowledgeable staff and idiosyncratic selection, felt genuine threat from Blockbuster's expansion. And many were eventually right to feel threatened. Blockbuster's selection was, by design, more mainstream. It avoided certain genres. In its early years, it had a policy of not stocking unrated films, which excluded significant portions of the art film and foreign film market. For serious film lovers, Blockbuster was often a disappointment. Studios discovered something surprising. Certain films performed far better in the home video market than in theaters. Children's films, in particular. A film that a child loves is a tape a parent will buy and will play 100 times until it wears out and they buy another copy. Disney, initially one of the most resistant to home video, eventually became one of its greatest beneficiaries. Their Black Diamond cassettes, the original home video releases of the animated classics, became prized possessions. The cassette that lived on your shelf, not rented, but yours, that you could watch whenever you wanted. It was a different relationship from the rental. It was ownership. It was permanence. It was a film that was part of your life, like a book on a shelf. Chapter 7. The tape goes global. The VHS revolution was not an American phenomenon. It was a global one. In the United Kingdom, VHS arrived in the early 1980s and encountered something remarkable: the video nasty era. Films like Cannibal Holocaust and The Evil Dead, which had never received theatrical release in Britain, circulated freely in British video stores, completely uncensored. The moral panic that followed led to the Video Recordings Act of 1984, one of the first significant regulatory responses to home video. The technology had created cultural and regulatory challenges that existing frameworks simply couldn't handle. Behind the Iron Curtain, the story was even more extraordinary. The official position of most communist governments was that Western popular culture was decadent and to be restricted. But VHS tapes were small, portable, and easily smuggled. A robust underground economy of tape trading developed in Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia. American films circulating on these tapes were windows into a different way of life, evidence that the world outside the Iron Curtain was not the impoverished, chaotic place that official propaganda described. The VHS tape was, in certain contexts, a tool of political consciousness, an instrument of cultural subversion. There are people alive today in what was formerly the Eastern Bloc who will tell you that their first exposure to genuine Western culture came through a badly dubbed VHS tape watched in someone's apartment with the curtains drawn. Who will tell you that those tapes changed something in them, some fundamental understanding of what the world was like and what it could be. This is not a trivial claim. This is the tape As agent of political transformation, the global spread of VHS accelerated the globalization of popular culture in a way that had never happened before. When a family in Warsaw and a family in Sao Paulo and a family in Sydney are all in the same week watching the same film on VHS, something has changed about the world. Some gap has been closed. Some shared experience has been created across geographic and cultural distances that would previously have made such sharing impossible. The tape went everywhere, and everywhere it went, it changed things.
Chapter 8: Children of the Cassette. There is a generation, roughly the people who were children between 1977s and 1997s, whose relationship to moving images was fundamentally shaped by the VHS tape. These are the children of the cassette, and their experience deserves its own moment. For a child of the VHS era, certain experiences were nearly universal. Waking up on a Saturday morning knowing that the movie you'd watched 100 times was right there, in its case on the shelf, available whenever you wanted it. Watching something so many times that the tape wore thin, that specific scenes had a slightly washed-out quality, the degradation building in your favorite moments. The Disney films were totemic. The Lion King, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. These films were known and internalized through the tape, through repeated viewings at home that turned them from films into something more, into shared cultural references so deep that a single line of dialogue can reduce a person in their 30s or 40s to instant, helpless nostalgia. The phenomenon of the repeated viewing tape is worth examining. When a child loves a film and has access to it on tape, they watch it with a frequency that parents often find bewildering. 5 viewings, 10, 20, 100. But the child is not simply watching passively. With each viewing, they are learning the film, internalizing it. The dialogue becomes verbal texture, available for quotation and comfort. The music becomes emotional touchstone. The images become visual vocabulary. A frame from a beloved film is shorthand for a whole constellation of feelings. This is how the children of the cassette learned to think about stories. There were also the home recordings, the tapes that parents made of birthdays, Christmas mornings, ordinary Tuesdays. The camera pointed at the Christmas tree, capturing not just the unwrapping of presents, but the background sounds, the voices, the laughter, the specific acoustics of that specific house. These home recordings on VHS are among the most precious artifacts the era produced. They are also among the most endangered. The magnetic tape degrades over time, and many home recordings have already become unwatchable, the images eaten by time, the stories lost. The specific quality of home video footage, the slightly washed-out colors, the ambient sound, the shaky handheld camera, has become a specific aesthetic register. It is the look of memory. It is the look of the past when the past was still being lived, not yet known to be the past, not yet understood as something that would become precious. The children of the cassette experienced something no generation had before: the ability to be their own programmer. You didn't have to watch what was on television. You could put in a tape. You could decide what you were watching. This decision-making power, this control over the narrative experience, is something we now take entirely for granted. But for the first generation to have it, it was genuinely novel. The children of the cassette are, in many ways, the psychological precursors of the streaming generation. They were the ones who first learned that media should come to you, should be available on demand, should be yours to control. Netflix and YouTube were built to satisfy an appetite that VHS first whetted.
Chapter 9: The Tape as Time Machine. I want to pause here and talk about something harder to quantify than market share or revenue figures, but in some ways more important. I want to talk about the VHS tape as an artifact of memory.
Your great-great-grandmother almost certainly never appeared in a moving image. She passed through the world and left no visual trace, no record of how she moved, how she laughed, what her voice sounded like. She is gone, and that goneness is complete. The VHS tape democratized visual memory. It made possible a kind of family archive that had never existed. An archive not just of special occasions, carefully posed, but of daily life, caught candid, preserved with all its imperfections and ambient sounds, and the beautiful awkwardness of real human beings not quite used to being filmed. There is a specific grief that attaches to damaged or lost VHS tapes. The tape that degraded before it could be digitized. The tape recorded over accidentally. The tape lost in a move, or damaged in a flood, or left too long in a garage. These are real losses. The footage that was on those tapes is gone as completely as if it had never been recorded. The machine that was going to make memory permanent was itself impermanent. The tape, like everything else, was mortal. Anyone who has watched VHS footage of themselves as a child, or of their parents when young, has had the experience of the footage not quite matching the memory. The memory is crisper, more colorful. The footage is softer, warmer, slightly blurry. The footage is more honest. The warm, soft, slightly imperfect look of VHS footage is the look of memory. It is what the past looks like. And this is why, when filmmakers want to evoke nostalgia, they reach for VHS aesthetics. The grain, the tracking errors, the color palette. These are not just technical characteristics. They are emotional triggers, capable of instantly transporting a viewer to a specific feeling of the past. VHS footage from the 1980s captures not just the people in it. You are watching the texture of a decade. The wall-to-wall carpet, the wood-paneled walls, the brown and orange color schemes, the enormous, boxy furniture, the clothing, the hairstyles, the cars visible through windows. VHS footage is evidence of a world that no longer exists. The tape was a time machine. Not a perfect one, nothing is. But in its imperfect, warm, grainy, magnetic way, it captured time. It held it. It made it available to be revisited. And when it gave way to the disc, and the disc gave way to the stream, something of that time machine quality was lost. The digital image is sharper, the colors more accurate. But the digital image does not look like memory. It looks like now. Because the past was warmer than we remembered, softer, more imperfect, and the tape knew it.
Chapter 10: The Economics of Abundance. By 1986, home video had become the largest single source of revenue for Hollywood studios. Not theatrical releases, not television licensing. Home video, the thing that the studios had gone to court to stop, was generating more money for the film industry than anything that had come before it. In 1980, home video revenue for major studios was roughly $300 million. Theatrical, $1.3 billion. By 1984, home video at $1.5 billion. Theatrical at $1.7. The gap narrowing rapidly. By 1986, home video surpassed theatrical for the first time. The studios were in mild shock. They had gone to the Supreme Court to stop this technology, and now it was their biggest moneymaker. How? Several factors converged. The sell-through market. When studios began pricing cassettes for consumer purchase, $20 to $30, volume exploded. A film that sold 100,000 theater tickets might sell 5 million cassettes. The back catalog. Every film sitting in a vault, generating no revenue because it had completed its theatrical run years or decades ago, suddenly had a new market. Classic Hollywood was introduced to millions of people who might never have encountered it otherwise. The changed economics of risk. When studios knew a film would have significant home video life, regardless of theatrical performance, they could make different decisions about what to produce. Films that might have been too risky as purely theatrical propositions could be greenlit if the home video math made sense. The financial transformation of Hollywood by VHS is one of the great stories of unexpected consequences in modern economic history. An industry that fought a technology with every legal tool at its disposal found, when it lost the fight, that the technology it tried to suppress was going to make it richer than it had ever been. The tape made Hollywood rich. The tape made rental store owners comfortable. The tape made consumers happy. This is not a common outcome in the history of technological disruption. Usually, someone loses decisively. In the home video revolution, almost everyone won. Chapter 11. The Lessons of the Tape. We are approaching the end of our story, but before we reach it, I want to spend time with the lessons of the tape, things the VHS era teaches us about how technology changes culture. These lessons matter not just as history, but as tools for understanding the technological changes happening around us right now. Lesson 1. The Format War and the Paradox of Standards. VHS didn't win because it was marketed better. It won because JVC understood that consumers wanted to record football games and movies, and that 1 hour wasn't enough. They understood the use case in a way that Sony, focused on engineering excellence, initially didn't. Technology is a means to an end. Understanding the end, what people are actually trying to do with their lives, is at least as important as mastering the means. Lesson 2. The lawsuit that saved the Internet. The Sony Betamax case is not just video history, it is one of the foundational legal cases of the digital age. The substantial non-infringing use standard has been applied in case after case: peer-to-peer file sharing, digital music players, cloud storage, YouTube. Without the Betamax decision, it is quite possible that the Internet as we know it would not exist, or would exist in a far more restricted form. The freedom of the open Internet rests in part on a 5-4 Supreme Court decision about whether you can record Gilligan's Island on your Sony VCR. This is not an exaggeration. It is one of the most underappreciated facts of modern technological history. Lesson 3. Disruption works in unexpected directions. Hollywood fought home video with every tool at its disposal, and then home video made Hollywood richer than it had ever been. The music industry fought digital downloads. The newspaper industry fought the Internet. Some disruptions end well for incumbents, some do not. The VHS example shows that the assumptions incumbents make about how a new technology will affect them are often wrong, and sometimes wrong in the most favorable possible direction. Lesson 4. Physicality matters. The transition from VHS to digital brought enormous benefits: convenience, selection, quality, accessibility. But it removed something real. The physical object had weight, texture, cover art. It could be held, lent to a friend. It was yours in a way that a license to stream is not yours. The cultural affection for physical media, the vinyl revival in music, the persistence of the book in an age of e-readers, the growing community of VHS collectors, is not simply irrational nostalgia. It reflects something real about how human beings relate to physical objects that contain cultural content. Lesson 5. The store was more than a store. The video rental store was a commercial institution, but it was also a community space, a site of education, discovery, and social encounter. The clerks were curators. The browsing was a form of film education, the sense of belonging to a community of people who loved film. These were real social goods. Netflix algorithm is sophisticated, but it is not a curator who knows your taste and surprises you. YouTube's recommendation engine is powerful, but it is not a conversation with a fellow enthusiast. The social and cultural goods that the video store provided were real, and their absence is real. Lesson 6. The imperfect can be beautiful. The VHS image was technically inferior to what came before and after, and yet the VHS aesthetic has become a beloved visual style, employed deliberately by artists who choose it for its expressive qualities. Technical improvement does not always mean aesthetic improvement. The qualities of a medium, including its limitations, are part of its expressive range. The past knew things about beauty that the future has sometimes forgotten. Chapter 12. The beginning of the end. Nothing lasts forever. For VHS, the forces of replacement were gathering in the mid-1980s, even as the format was reaching its commercial peak. The first serious challenger was the Laserdisc, and while it was ultimately unsuccessful in the mass market, it deserves attention. Launched in the United States in 1978, it used a 12-inch optical disc storing video in analog format, superior to VHS in resolution, color, and audio. No tape degradation, no tracking errors, no rewinding, and noticeably sharper. It was also extremely expensive, and it could not record. You could not tape your child's first steps on a Laserdisc. It was purely a vehicle for pre-recorded commercial content. Laserdisc found its audience among the most devoted cinephiles willing to pay a substantial premium. Criterion Collection released its catalog on Laserdisc with director's commentaries and supplementary materials that were among the finest home video products ever made. But at its peak, Laserdisc had perhaps 2 to 3% of the American market. And yet Laserdisc matters enormously. It was the proof of concept optical disc technology could store and playback video of higher quality than magnetic tape. That proof of concept would become the DVD. The DVD was announced in 1995 and launched in the United States in March 1997. And from the very first moment consumers got their hands on one, it was clear this was something genuinely different. Sharper, vivid colors, Dolby Digital surround sound, small, durable discs, no rewinding, no degradation, jump to any chapter instantly, and cheap. Player prices dropped from several $100s to under $100 within a few years. The mass market that Laserdisc had never reached was within DVD's grasp from the beginning. DVD adoption grew faster than any consumer electronics format in history. By 2003, DVD rentals had surpassed VHS rentals in the United States. By 2006, the last major Hollywood studio had released its final VHS title. By 2008, VHS manufacturing had essentially ceased. 30 years after arriving in American living rooms, the tape was finished. But the end of the tape was not the end of the home video story. Because while DVD triumphed over VHS, something else was happening. Something that would ultimately prove even more transformative. The internet was growing up. Chapter 13: The Fall of Blockbuster. No story of the VHS era is complete without a proper reckoning with the fall of Blockbuster video. Because Blockbuster's collapse, one of the most dramatic business failures of the early 21st century, is not just a business story. It is the story of the moment when the world that the VHS tape had built finally gave way to the world the internet was making. At its peak, in 2004, Blockbuster had more than 9,000 stores worldwide, 60,000 employees, and revenue of approximately $6 billion. It was one of the great retail empires of the late 20th century. It was standing on a trapdoor. Late fees were estimated to account for roughly 16% of Blockbuster's total revenue, nearly $1 billion annually. When CEO John Antioco made the decision to eliminate late fees to compete with Netflix, it was bold and strategically sound. But it was also an immediate revenue hit that frightened investors and ultimately contributed to his removal. There is a story, probably apocryphal in its specific details, but true in its essentials, that a man rents a video from Blockbuster. He forgets to return it on time. He is charged a significant late fee. He is so angry that he vows in that moment to create a service that would eliminate late fees entirely. Then goes on to do exactly that. The man is Reed Hastings. The service is Netflix. Blockbuster made several attempts to compete with Netflix in the DVD by mail space. Its Total Access program was by many accounts technically and strategically superior. It allowed customers to return mail DVDs to physical stores and receive instant in-store exchanges. Netflix's CEO was apparently genuinely worried about Total Access for a period. But Blockbuster's financial situation, heavily leveraged, squeezed between the costs of its physical store network and the investments required for digital transition, prevented effective execution. The company went bankrupt in 2010. The stores closed one by one across the country and around the world, all but one. In Bend, Oregon, there is a Blockbuster video store that is still open. The last surviving Blockbuster in the world, the last outpost of a chain that once numbered 9,000 stores. It has become improbably a tourist attraction. People drive to Bend specifically to walk those aisles, to browse the shelves, to experience the specific temporal dislocation of a space that survived from the VHS era intact. It is not a museum exactly. It is a functioning business, but it is also necessarily a kind of monument, a physical representation of the era the tape built, a space where the rituals of Friday night video rental can still be enacted in their original analog form by anyone willing to make the pilgrimage. The tape is gone from those shelves, mostly. The spirit is not. Chapter 14: The VHS Revival. Here is something that 20 years ago few people would have predicted. The VHS tape is experiencing a revival, not a commercial revival, but a genuine cultural phenomenon, a growing community of enthusiasts, collectors, and artists who are actively seeking out VHS tapes and VHS players for reasons that have everything to do with love and nostalgia and the specific qualities of the format, and almost nothing to do with practical advantage. There are films, some with genuine cultural significance, that have never been released in digital format. Rights issues, estate complications, the simple commercial calculation that a limited audience doesn't justify the cost of digital transfer. For these films, the VHS tape is not nostalgia. It is the only way to watch them. If the tapes degrade and the players break, and no one has made a digital copy, these films will simply cease to be accessible. They will effectively cease to exist. Then there is the VHS as aesthetic choice. Horror filmmakers have embraced VHS aesthetics as a deliberate creative decision. The found footage horror genre draws heavily on the aesthetic language of consumer video recording, the grain, the tracking artifacts, the color palette, to create a feeling of authenticity and unease that high-definition video cannot replicate. This is interesting precisely because it is now a choice. When VHS was the dominant format, its aesthetic qualities were simply what video looked like. Now, the decision to present content with VHS aesthetics is a meaningful artistic statement. It says, I want this to look like a specific time, a specific technology, a specific relationship to reality. Music videos have embraced it. Artists ranging from indie folk to hip-hop to pop have produced videos with deliberate VHS grading, the warm colors, the soft focus, the grain that says, this is memory, this is the past, this has emotional weight that the clean digital present lacks. The VHS aesthetic has become a language, a visual shorthand for warmth, nostalgia, authenticity, and the texture of a world that was softer and less precisely defined than our current one. The tape also has qualities that interest artists working with time and memory and materiality. The tape that has been played 1,000 times looks different from the tape that has never been played. It carries the record of its own use in its physical substance. A digital file is identical on its 1,000th play to its first. It does not wear, it does not age. The digital image does not degrade into warmth. It either works or it doesn't. The VHS tape, by contrast, fails gracefully. Its degradation is gradual and visible. The tracking artifacts, the fading color saturation over decades. These are the marks of time, visible in the image itself. The tape shows you its own history. It cannot hide what it has been through. The tape refuses to die because it still has things to offer that the alternatives do not. Chapter 15: The Streaming Age and Its Discontents. We live now in the streaming age. The tape is gone. The physical video store is a memory. The distribution of moving images happens through wires and algorithms and the vast, largely invisible infrastructure of the Internet. This is remarkable. By many measures, better than what came before. The selection is larger. The quality is higher. The cost is lower. The convenience is incomparable. And yet, there is a specific dissatisfaction with streaming that is difficult to articulate precisely, but widely shared. A feeling that something is missing, that the abundance of choice has not produced a commensurate abundance of satisfaction. Part of this is the paradox of choice, the phenomenon, well documented by psychologists, in which having more options leads to less satisfaction. When you had 100 titles at the video store, you chose among them and were satisfied. When you have 30,000 titles on a streaming service, the decision becomes a problem. You spend so much time deciding what to watch that you arrive at your choice already fatigued. The algorithm is supposed to solve this, and the algorithm is, in technical terms, quite good. But the algorithm's discovery is predetermined in a way that the video stores wasn't. The serendipity is manufactured, and manufactured serendipity is not quite the same as the real thing. The streaming age has also produced fragmentation that creates its own anxieties. Netflix, Hulu, HBO, Max, Disney+, Amazon Prime, Peacock, Paramount+, Apple TV+, each with their own exclusive content, each requiring separate subscription fees, each a walled garden. The consumer who wants access to everything must subscribe to everything at a collective cost quickly approaching the cost of cable television, which was supposed to be the thing streaming replaced. The video store had everything in one place. You didn't need to know which studio had released a film before you could find it. The video store was a neutral aggregator. The streaming age replaced that with competitive silos. There is a specific impermanence that frustrates consumers who remember physical ownership. The film that was there last month is gone this month. The television series you were halfway through has been removed from the platform. The physical copy on your shelf would never do that to you. These discontents are the discontents of abundance, the specific frustrations of having more than you can manage. They are not arguments against streaming. They are arguments for building streaming systems that better serve consumers. But they are also worth sitting with as evidence that the transition from physical to digital has not been purely, simply, unambiguously an improvement. It has been a trade of one set of problems for another. The people who grew up in the VHS era feel these problems acutely because they remember what the alternative was like. They remember what it felt like to hold the tape, to choose among 100 titles on a Friday evening, to have a conversation with someone who knew film and cared about it and wanted to share that knowledge. This is fine. This is how generational change works. The VHS era is not coming back. The tape is finished. The video store is gone. The rituals of Friday night rental are a memory. But the memory matters. The memory of what worked, what was beautiful, what was lost. This matters for how we build what comes next. The designers and engineers and entrepreneurs building the entertainment systems of the future would do well to understand what the VHS era got right, what the video store got right. They might find that the lessons of the tape, imperfect, humble, warm, and gone, are more useful than they expected. Chapter 16. Goodbye to the Tape. A final meditation. We are at the end now, at the end of the tape in every sense. I want to spend these last minutes not on history or analysis or lessons, but on something simpler and more personal. I want to tell you what I miss about it. The music softens. The narrator's voice becomes quieter, more intimate. I miss the weight of it, the physical weight of a cassette in your hand, the specific gravity of a decision that was also an object. When you picked up a tape, you were committing to something. You were saying, "This is what tonight is." I miss the cover art, the lurid, sometimes beautiful, sometimes absurd cover art, the paintings and airbrushed illustrations that tried to compress a whole film's promise into a single image, the movies that were greater on the cover than on the tape, the movies so much greater than their covers that you were genuinely surprised, the covers that became so familiar they were part of the film itself. I miss the smell. I know how this sounds, but the video store had a smell, and it was a good smell. Plastic and carpet and possibility, and the specific olfactory note that magnetic tape emits, subtle and chemical and unmistakable. That smell meant you are here. Tonight, you are going to watch a movie. I miss the blue screen, that specific blue, the VCR input blue that appeared for a moment between the cassette going in and the image appearing. It was a threshold, a held breath, an anticipation. We don't have that moment anymore. The streaming image appears instantly, without ceremony. It is convenient. It is better in every practical sense. But the blue screen was its own kind of magic. I miss the community of the rental store, the other people browsing on Friday evening, the conversations that started over shared uncertainties or enthusiasms, the shared experience of being in a place that existed specifically for the purpose of deciding what to watch tonight. I miss the permanence, the sense that the tape on your shelf was yours, completely and permanently, that the film encoded on that magnetic ribbon was available to you on any evening forever, for as long as the tape held together. The streaming service can take a film away. The tape cannot be taken away. What was on it was there. I miss the ritual of rewinding, the few minutes of tape spooling back through the machine, the soft whir of the mechanism, the satisfaction of the click when it finished. It was a small thing, but small things accumulate into the texture of a life, and the texture of the VHS life was good. Here is what I want to say, finally, about the VHS era. It was a specific and irreplaceable time, a time when ordinary people, for the first time in history, had genuine control over their relationship to moving images, when they could build libraries of their favorite films, when they could share those films with the people they loved. It was a time when a particular industry grew from nothing to an $8 billion behemoth in less than a decade, creating jobs and institutions and communities in hundreds of cities and towns across America and around the world. It was a time when Hollywood was saved by the thing it tried to kill, and when a generation of filmmakers was educated by the institutions Hollywood tried to suppress. It was a time when the Boston Strangler turned out to be a gold mine, when the technology the lawyers fought was the technology that paid their clients' bills, when the future arrived not as disaster, but as unexpected abundance. The tape is gone, the era is over, the blue screen is dark, but in the memories of the people who lived it, in the fond, vivid, irreplaceable memories of Friday evenings and video store shelves, and the click and whir of the machine accepting the cassette, the tape rolls on. And when it reaches the end, when the last frame passes and the magnetic ribbon pulls tight against the reel and the machine clicks and is still, there is, if you close your eyes, a blue screen, a moment of held breath, an anticipation of what comes next.
Epilogue. A note on preservation. Before we truly say goodbye, a word about something that matters enormously and doesn't get enough attention. Magnetic tape degrades. This is a physical fact, not a metaphor. The magnetic particles that carry image information on a VHS tape are held to the tape's backing by a binder material that deteriorates over time. A tape recorded in 1985 has been degrading for 40 years. Many such tapes are already unwatchable. The content at risk is not just Hollywood films, which are mostly preserved in other formats. It is the content that exists only on VHS, local news broadcasts, home recordings, community access television programs, independent productions that were distributed only on tape and never transferred elsewhere. This content is being lost. Right now, today, as you watch this video, tapes are degrading in boxes in attics and garages and closets their images fading, their stories disappearing. If you have VHS tapes at home, especially tapes with unique content, home recordings, local productions, anything that doesn't exist elsewhere, please consider having them digitized. Many local libraries offer this service. Many commercial services offer it at reasonable prices. The cost of digitization is small. The cost of inaction, the permanent loss of those images, those voices, those moments, is incalculable. The tape is ending. Help us save what's on it.
Thank you for staying with us. A new video is released every week. Subscribe to the Historical Facts channel so you don't miss it, where you'll find plenty more fascinating stories about our world. All the best, and see you next time.